Let's get this out of the way. Mavuika is the strongest DPS in Genshin Impact, but should you still get her if you have not pulled for her on her very first release? I think that's the question that people have on their mind, and today we'll talk about it. So welcome, let's begin. So what can you realistically get out of Mavuika? Now, she is a pyro main DPS, but can be played as a sub DPS as well. Now I'll go through like her builds and like her combos, but briefly about what she does. Now Mavuika has two versions of her skill. One is a tap version, which basically turns into xilonen, being able to do off-field damage, whereas the whole version mounts Flame Strider, which is her motorbike, and she'll be able to do pyro damage from her changed attacks. So basically her normal attack now, she rides Flame Strider and swings her claymore. Her charge attack, she spins, does the kuru just like the herder, and then for her plunging, she slams her motorbike into the ground. Now obviously this is pretty good. For the off-field side, it does allow to place a sub DPS for other characters that want pyro application. Obviously she competes with xilonen in this regard, but obviously doesn't have the 80 energy requirement because Mavuika's is by the tap of the skill and it's only bound by the 15-second cooldown. Now, as for the whole version, kind of is part of a bread and butter kit, but you technically want to be in her burst form when you undo your normal or charge attacks, and that's what we'll talk about later. That being said, no matter what you do, you generate 5 particles or pyro, and also you're able to switch between both forms with the tap of the skill. Looking at the numbers here, you'll see that the charge attack does do better overall. Obviously, there are certain combos and attacks that you can do. Don't talk about them here because honestly, just by holding your charge button and like spinning around, you will do enough damage. But you know, there are ways like jumping every 4th hit just to apply the cryo, stuff like that. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter. Mavuika still hits so hard that you can just hold your left click and you will do well anyways. Now let's talk about elemental burst briefly. All right, special mechanic called fighting spirit stacks, basically maximum of 200, where you need 100 to unleash your elemental burst, but generally you want to exceed that 100 because it does give bonus to your initial burst hit, but also your subsequent normal and charge attacks as well. Now, how do you get this fighting spirit stacks? Well, 2 ways. First way is when your party members consume nightsoul points. This is a 1-to-1 conversion, so 100 nightsoul points consumed equals to 100 fighting spirit stacks. And the other way is when Mavuika or any party member uses their normal attacks. This will be 1.5 fighting spirit stacks per 0.1 seconds. So once you have enough fighting spirit stacks and you use your elemental burst, Mavuika gains 10 nightsoul points, enters into a nightsoul blessing, so she rides Flame Strider, slashes with the Sunfell Slice, and then does big PP damage, and will enter into the Crucible of Death and Life state. Basically, this is just 7 seconds of no consumption of nightsoul points, and this also increases the damage of your Sunfell Slice, as mentioned earlier, and also your normal and charge attacks that are based off your skill. So obviously this is just big damage, and why you kind of want to have as many nightsoul points as possible before unleashing your elemental burst. Now, tying in with the elemental burst is her A4 passive. Basically gives a damage bonus up to 40% for each stack. So each stack is 0.2%, so 200 stacks would be 40%. It decays, which means that it goes lower and lower over time, but it does last for 20 seconds. Good not only for Mavuika herself, but also for the on-field DPS in playing her as a sub DPS. And lastly, the A1 passive basically gives her an attack boost 30% for 10 seconds if party members like xilonen or citlali triggers a nightsoul burst. And so we'll get out of the way. Let's talk about some of the things about Mavuika. Obviously, one of the strongest DPS in the game. If you look through the tier list, she was always at the top. She has found the fastest clears, and at the same time, she's also easy to play. And I think that is also a big factor for some players because you just get your stacks, get your burst, spin, and you win. Now, obviously, there's some people who do not like her gameplay. Personally, I do prefer Arlecchino's, I would say. Not saying that hers is bad, I just prefer Arlecchino's. But generally, I find that Mavuika just does a lot of damage. I think, you know, it obviously makes like your runs a lot easier. And obviously she works very well because she's pyro. She synergizes very well with like cryo or hydro characters because she can vaporize and melt. Also, Jenny not really her best team, especially the main DPS, but because of a pyro element, she's able to synergize with Chevrus to be able to be played in overload team comps. Generally not my favorite through testing. I prefer like the vape or melt comps a lot more, partly because the only Natlan characters that are electro are iansan and ororon, who are good characters, but generally are not helpful enough, especially in getting her stacks for her fighting spirit. That being said, still pretty good. Team comp can clear very comfortably, but you will see a noticeable difference between her VIP and especially her melt team comps. And also as an added bonus, even though we talk about how restrictive her teams can be as a main DPS, as a sub DPS, she is surprisingly flexible. Yes, she would not be able to burst as much as possible, but generally you can see that as a sub DPS, she's able to provide a lot of power application, although not as much as Xiangling, to teams like Morlani, to Kinish, Varesa, even non-Natlan characters like Cloren and Navia. She's able to provide quite a decent amount of pyro damage, and with the caveat that she doesn't have the crazy ER requirement or energy requirement of Xiangling. I think that's something to take note because obviously it can be a little bit difficult to maintain, especially if you're not using Bennett with Xiangling. Obviously using Bennett Xiangling is obviously mitigated, but without Bennett funneling energy into her and it's a sole pyro, it can be a lot difficult, especially like a Morlani team where you obviously don't want to run Bennett with her because she is HP scaling, and so Xiangling is a solo pyro DPS, has to sacrifice a lot of damage for ER, whereas in the case of like Mavuika, you just have to tap your skill, wait 15 seconds, tap the skill again. And I think that there's obviously a lot of comfort for players who play with Morlani. But let's talk about the big problem that people have with Mavuika, and I think that is something that kind of hampered her reputation and also hampered her team building, which is her fighting spirit stack generation, especially the portion with the nightsoul points consumption. Before her release, there was technically only one character that could support Mavuika properly, and that was xilonen. Technically Kachina and Ororon as well, but they don't have as much nightsoul points generation. And also they're just there for the Synchronicity buff, let's be real, especially for Kachina, right? Kachina provides nothing else besides the points and the Synchronicity buff. But obviously on the release, citlali also came out, and obviously there's a big controversy because citlali was on the same phase, not even the same patch, right? They were on the same phase next to each other, which obviously drove a lot of controversies because, you know, it was a big problem, right? I made a video upon it, you know, saying that, you know, devs were very greedy about it. The thing is that, you know, obviously citlali does very well because she's cryo, she's able to provide the cryo application for melt, and also xilonen because of the resistance shred as well. And also for xilonen herself, I think that she does, because she consumes 90 points immediately, that kind of helps her to provide a lot of fighting spirit stacks for Mavuika. Obviously, ever since then, we do have iansan that came out, who's also pretty good at maintaining her stacks, as well as other DPSs that use her as a sub DPS role like Varesa. Now, obviously, this problem of being restrictive on your teammates has gotten a lot has gotten attention again because of Skirk. Now, I'll say this about Mavuika and why I think this is a problem that will be worse for Mavuika than for Skirk, right? For Skirk is the reliance on cryo and hydro, for those unaware, whereas Mavuika is the reliance of Natlan characters. And that's because it is more likely that Hoyoverse will release more cryo and hydro characters in the future, whereas there's less likely for them to release more Natlan characters. You look at the amount of Sumeru characters that have come out since Sumeru ended. Literally one, which was Cethos. As for Fontaine characters, since Fontaine ended, literally one, which was Escoffier. And so And of course, every year we see like a Liyue character, but that means that, yeah, are we going to see like two more Natlan characters or one? We don't know where can you see another Natlan character in the upcoming future in Not Cry, and also for what's his name, for like Sheshnaya and stuff like that. And I think that will cause a lot of bigger issue, because that means that whatever we have right now as of 5.7, because 5.8 is going to be a Nefa, who is not going to be from Natlan, right? She's more Not Cry associated, which means that the few sub DPS or supports that we have, which means that like your Ororon, your Kachina, your xilonen, your iansan, maybe your Aoife if you're coping, these will be your only options going forward. And I think that, yes, you're kind of restricted to citlali and xilonen most of the time, but the fact is that I don't think they're going to release any more Natlan characters or any noteworthy Natlan characters in the future. And I think that will cause a big problem for Mavuika, because it means that if you want to really play Mavuika, you are going to be tied between those 5 characters or 6 characters. And yes, you could still play her as a sub DPS, but why are you? When the question is like, yes, you can play Mavuika as a sub DPS, but you shouldn't pull Mavuika for a sub DPS. You should still pull Mavuika for a main DPS, and the sub DPS should be something that you play along the way with other characters being released. And so that's my take on the whole Mavuika thing. I think that personally she is very overhated because of that restriction. But to give a realistic view of that restriction, right, we have to understand that whatever we have right now, the Natlan characters, will be your only options realistically. Maybe they might release a Natlan character and Not Cry, but realistically, is that Natlan character going to be beneficial for Mavuika herself? Because we've seen like enough Aoife. Aoife is not going to help out Mavuika technically, so that's that, right? Realistically, you're going to be looking at mostly xilonen and citlali, which means it's going to be very restrictive. Yes, people are going to argue that if you're pulling for Skirk, you want restrictive, you're also restricted to like Escoffier, but you technically do not need Escoffier. Yes, Escoffier is part of a best team, but you technically do not need her, right? Because there are other characters that can fill that void, and it's more likely that they release more characters in the future that can fill that void. Whereas while xilonen and citlali are her best in slots, realistically, who else are you going to use besides them? Because, well, even though Kachina is not bad, right? But let's be real, Kachina is just there for simplicity, and Ororon is fine with iansan, but you have to have in my opinion, you have to have at least Ororon there because of the pyro application, not pyro, sorry, the electro application for overload team comps. And so I think that kind of leads like Mavuika in a very bad situation. And I think that it is power, but with limitations. And I think that if you are unwilling to play into those limitations, which to be fair to xilonen and citlali, there are 2 very good characters. Xilonen is one of the most universal characters, whereas citlali doesn't need Mavuika to work. Citlali can work with Alakino, can work with Divillet, and and with Skirk. Technically, not really with Skirk. I don't really like citlali with Skirk, but you can see that generally, these 2 characters are still pretty good for your roster. It's not like they're only good for Mavuika, but at the same time, you have to understand that if you're playing Mavuika, you have to be bound by these restrictions of the nightsoul mechanic and the Natlan characters. And that means that in future versions, there will be hardly any support if Hoyoverse decides to not revisit, which is harder than like Cryo and Hydro, because those are basically elements of the game. And I don't think they will like dish them like what they did with Geo going into Not Cry Sheshnaya. Literally, where Sheshnaya is basically the Cryo region. But yeah, that's all I have to say about Mavuika. I think she does provide a lot. I think that she is overhated, and I think that she definitely provides a lot for your account in terms of damage. But in my opinion, if like someone who plays Zenless Zone 0 Mavuika's situation reminds me a lot of Miyabi. Strongest character in the game. I don't think anyone can doubt that both of these characters are the strongest DPS in the game, but you shouldn't pull them just because they're the strongest in the game and then leave them with nothing. They still need a team to be built around them. Whether for Miyabi it's anomaly teams or like a mono ice with Sokaku, whereas for Mavuika you have to really play with the Natlan nightsoul mechanic. But yeah, that's all I really want to say about Mavuika really. As I said, not really here to talk about a guide. I did think about it, but simple. Obsidian Codex, crit weapons, or EM or attack weapons. EM if you're playing with melt or vaporize, attack otherwise, and that's for both main DPS and sub DPS. You change to Cinder City sub DPS, but if there's a better teammate, they can use Cinder City, use that. As a main DPS, good for melt, vaporize, overload, burning, and then it can also be a sub DPS for burning, melt, vaporize, all those good stuff. So hey, that's basically how you use her, right? Like I said, strongest character, very overhated, but I think that people need to understand her limits. I'm gonna leave you guys with just a playthrough of like her best team: Mavuika, xilonen, Banner, and citlali. No optimal combos. I just spin to win most of this time. As I mentioned, you don't need like all those fancy tricks. You can learn them to squeeze out a few seconds, but generally I think that she's very strong and doesn't really need that. But hey, if you guys want to really see my stuff, I will start showing it. What I have. I do have signature weapons. I do have Obsidian Codex, just with EM because melt obviously does very well. And then we have xilonen. I'm too lazy to switch stuff, so there'll be 2 Cinder Cities. I'm just too lazy, don't add me. And it just shows that how unultimately built my team is. It is still doing very well. Gonna show her talents. And then artifacts, we have Cinder City over here, just defense and crit rate for her and ER. Banner has the noblesse. I think I've seen it before. My C5 because I refuse to C6 because Lynette is great. And then this is citlali with the signature weapon. I unfortunately lost Mavuika's signature weapon to citlali, which is why I have it. Wasn't planning on pulling, but yeah. That's basically that. 199. So yeah, just enjoy the showcase. So that's that for the video. Unfortunately, I wanted to really make a guide, but I decided against it because first of all, I was sick over the week, and I was so busy with work, so that took a lot of time. And also at the same time, instead of making a guide, I just wanted to talk about my feelings on her instead of telling you like how to build her, but really my thoughts on the character from a more like, I don't know, just from my thoughts as a player, right? Other than that, thank you all for watching this video. Really appreciate it. Thumbs up, share, comment, like, subscribe, all the good stuff. Do follow me on Twitch. Leave down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay healthy, stay safe, good to yourselves and the people around you. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.